I had a,
1990.
okay, yeah. I had a 2-month-old when I was making that movie, and so I remember it very well, but I don't remember seeing, I know I only saw it once, I think, I'm afraid. I think, didn't we go to some film festival with it or something?
No, it was at various festivals, and I've seen it several times since then.
You've described it as the filmmakers, I think, that you've wanted to have the most reevaluated, and also the film that's closest to you in your childhood.
Yes, I grew up in a small town in Oregon, not a big city like Kansas City, Missouri, but all of these social situations, and family and social situations that you saw in the film, the whole sort of social structure and all the kinds of things that people did and were expected to do, exactly the same in the town that I grew up in Oregon as in the film. So in that sense, the film seems very autobiographical to me and familiar.
And you had read the first of the novels, Mrs. Bridge, for the first time in 1965, when you were in Calcutta.
Something like that, and yes. Well, I was in India, and I guess I mean I remember in some kind of weird way. I mean, it's 2 novels, it's Mrs. Bridge and Mr. Bridge. And in some sort of weird way, in one of those book stalls that they have in the Indian Railroad rail station, like we have here, there was Mr. Bridge, the novel Mr. Bridge, and I bought it, and in India, and so I read both of them, and I wanted Ruth Jabala to be interested, and she said, "Oh, it wasn't her sort of thing." She said she couldn't do it. She didn't feel at home, and so it had to wait a bit before we were able to pull it together.
So the story is that basically you had dinner with Paul and Joanne, and it kind of emerged that you had this shared fascination.
Right. Well, I was having dinner with Paul and Joanne, and she was going to do for television with Robert Holme. She was going to do a version of Mrs. Bridge, and but since Paul was there, and I said, well, why don't we do Mrs. and Mr. Bridge? And then he said right away, I'll play Mr. Bridge. Just like that. So that's what happened, and everything changed, and it was made into quite a different sort of film with him.
They had acted alongside each other. They had acted with him directing her, and not acting alongside. They had out in theater and film, like every possible permutation, I think, of doing that. How did you find your way into working with them? Was there any kind of, did they really even need direction?
No, it was...
No, I laughed at him saying, did they even need direction?
There's a thing that Joanne Woodward talks about a lot in Profiles from the Times, where she says, that the value of being married is that you know how to touch it.
All actors need direction. And even Paul Newman needed direction. I remember there was a scene, it's a scene where the young man who wants to marry his daughter comes in and says, I am going to marry her, and in a rehearsal, but Paul is sitting at his desk, and in rehearsal he slammed the door. And I thought, Mr. Bridge would never slam a door in front of that boy. So I had to tell him that. And made him think that over. And he agreed that was true. But that's about the only time that he did anything wrong.
Kyra, do you remember when you first got involved in the project? Were you pregnant when you auditioned?
No, I wasn't. Joanna Merlin was actually, a little bit of nepotism, my mother's best friend. And, she had known me since I was pregnant in my mother's womb. I was Peanut. And she had watched my career, and I had done a few things, and I'd done stage, and I'd done a couple of films, and she brought me in to meet James, and said, must have said something like, I think this is the one, and he, I mean, I didn't even have to audition. I don't remember auditioning. And I remember having a meeting at the table, and yeah, so that's how I came to the project, and it was an extraordinary role. I mean, I feel like I want to say thank you so much for that role. It was beautiful and extraordinary, and I felt so deeply touched by the material. I remember that last little moment at the very end where you see those family movies. That's Ruth who takes off her bathing suit. And I remember in the beginning of Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, they talk about how Ruth took off her bathing suit when she was a teeny little toddler and ran around the pool, and her mother ran around chasing her. And it was sort of felt to me like the genesis of the sort of, you know, you mustn't be sexual, you mustn't. You can see how well that turned out. But it was a great role. I was super. I mean, obviously, it was very excited to work with James, and of course Paul Newman and John Ritter. That was extraordinary, and I felt, I mean, I died and went to heaven.
So you've actually, I think a little over a decade ago, you described it as one of like maybe the best professional experiences you'd ever had, and I think part of that was because of you felt very like mentored by Paul, both as a performer and then also as a new parent. And I'm just wondering what those moments of working with him like, and the kind of, especially, you know, acting opposite him.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we did for rehearsal was that we went to the actor's studio. I don't know if you remember this, and we did the. I was up in the balcony and he was down in the pit, and we did the scene from Romeo and Juliet together. And I thought, oh my God, Paul Newman is my Romeo. What could be better than that? But when we were working together, yeah, he was extraordinarily, you know, professional, but also I was a real raconteur and talk about the business and his life in the business and how he managed to have a family, you know, as well. And there I was with a 2-month-old, and I do remember one time he said to me, he said, you never stop worrying about them. And he kind of got all misty with his blue eyes, and he sort of teared up, and I thought, what? What do you mean you never stop worrying about them? I mean, I had literally told myself as a young mother, I was 23, oh, I'm just gonna have to worry about them until they're 18, and then I'll stop. And when he said that to me, I thought, oh my God, he's not kidding. And I felt as though someone had, you know, thrown me across the room, but it was actually really, you know, insightful and very helpful. And of course, I think about it all the time now as I wake up as a mother of a 34-year-old and worry constantly. And he also told me that I needed to work on my driving a little bit too. He let me take him to dinner one day with my kid in the back seat, and he said, why are you leaning over the steering wheel like that? What do you think you're doing? And anyway, you need to go to whatever Skip Barber's racing school. And anyway. But yes, he was wonderful, and they both were, and they really scooped me up, you know, and they really scooped me up for years. I mean, I was friendly with them for decades.
James, there's a credit that I heard some audience members chuckling at, which is that Senator Bob Dole is Paul Newman's Shakespearean coach. I don't know if you remember how that came about. I was looking it up last night, and apparently I guess Paul had asked Bob Dole to tell him how a Kansas banker would recite Shakespeare.
I don't remember either anymore what happened, but yes, he had something between them. Bob Dole was helpful in some kind of way. I don't remember anymore how that came about. But anyway, that's true.
It's a very distinct credit. A lot of the stuff in the house is from author Evan Connell's house, right? Like the production had gone, and they had managed to get like a lot of the porcelain out of the house and all that. Were you there for that? Were you part of the kind of refashioning? Because I think also there's some items from your family.
No, the house. Hold on. No, the house in the film.
No, the items in the house. Some like the plateware and stuff like not the
there
actual
were
house
things.
itself.
Yes, yeah, there were all bits and pieces. Yes, there were.
Did you, and there's a little bit from your family as well?
People are always very nervous about the things that they loan to a film company for a set. And that's why I would never, ever, I have a very nice house, I would never allow a film company to come into my house.
Never.
What are some memories for you of some of the, I guess, either parts of it that were especially difficult for you, or alternately just so evocative of your upbringing that was like a little bit disconcerting? Were there any moments like that?
Well, I didn't live in Klamath Falls, Oregon. It did not have some sort of grand, a sort of. There was that party in a modern house with all kinds of pictures and works of art and so forth, and everybody dancing and all that. So we didn't have anything like that in my time. So when I had to do those kinds of things, and I just had to do them and make most of them. But a lot of it was, I don't know, it was I felt very familiar with what I was doing all the time. Yeah.
At the time, in the Times profiles from the time, Paul and Joanne kind of talked a little bit about how, like, for them it's like a very intense production. You know, like there wasn't as much money, there wasn't much time as they were used to. Was it the same?
Well, there wasn't. It wasn't that tense. I don't remember it being that tense. It went along very well. I mean, there were very few things that went wrong that we couldn't manage.
I hesitate to ask, but what went wrong?
What?
What went wrong?
No, but I mean, things always go wrong in a movie. You know, you can't get something. Well, one of the things was Paul leaving every weekend to go racing somewhere, and then he would come back with his nose sunburned. That made makeup people most unhappy. That's the kind of thing that could go wrong. Nothing you could do about it, and he was not. He promised that he would not do that. I mean, they weren't going to insure him if he did that. The film insurers weren't going to insure him if he continued with his racing. And he says, "Oh, I won't do that." But in fact, he did. And most weekends, if it was a good weekend, he went off somewhere and raced and came back with a sunburned nose.